So our next session is with some more of our students, and we have two fantastic moderators for this session. We'd like to welcome to Cambridge from Oxford, Dr. Anne Makena, who is the co-director of the African Oxbridge initiative, which on the website says it's all things African in Oxford. So she's responsible for setting up strategic partnerships in research and capacity building between Oxford and African units, and previous to that was working with NGOs and institutions such as AMPATH in Kenya. So Dr. Anne, most welcome to Cambridge, and it's lovely to have you here. And she's joined by our own Tabitha Mwangi, who is the program manager for Cambridge Africa. So Tabitha, I met when she was doing public health, which she took on ably after working at the Wellcome Trust unit in Kilifi, having got a background in veterinary epidemiology and doing her PhD in malaria epidemiology. And we're so happy and thrilled to have you on board with Cambridge Africa, and we're really looking forward to this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we'll dive right in because we don't have a lot of time. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to have Epiphania. Oh, perfect. She's here. So we'll dive right in. The topic today is about the age-old question about, African scholars come and study abroad, and then there's that thing, when you finish your education, do you go back? Do you stay here? What happens? What happens in that situation? So my first question, and I'll ask each one of our... So we've got 4 scholars, 2 from Cambridge, 2 Cambridge PhD students, and 2 Oxford PhD students. We like to mix between ourselves. We are very good buddies with Anne, so we do like to kind of share these experiences together. So the first question will go to Martin. He'll introduce himself and then he'll answer the question. When you hear that phrase, go home, what does it stir in you?
My name is Martin Waga. I am doing a PhD right now in genomics at the Wellcome Genome Campus. I was trained in Kenya. I'm a Kenyan, and I'm sure this will bring some good memories to Kevin Marsh. I was trained at the Cambridge Wellcome Trust. He was one of the godfathers of the institute, and I recall in my training program, which is the IDEAL program, which is a sister program to Thrive that you have seen under the African Academy of Sciences, which I hope is still around. We were told that IDEAL's job is to attract you into scientific research. And then it is to train you, which I think they might have succeeded now that I'm here in Cambridge. And finally, it is to retain the expertise. Now, when I'm asked about going home, it raises 3 questions in my mind. The first is a little bit controversial. Now that I'm in a land far away from home, there is a question of, am I ever accepted? Will I be considered as an immigrant or as an expatriate? And what are the connotations between the two? The second question is about my ethical responsibility, especially regarding the place I came from. Am I mandated, now having received global expertise training, to go back? And the third question is, what about my own personal ambitions? If I feel that I may exert my capacities better far away from my country, which perhaps may not be prioritizing research very well, am I justified in making that decision regardless of the answers to the 2 previous points? Yeah, thank you.
I don't know whether anyone else in the team would like to add something. Azamat.
Well, thank you very much. The concept of home is important. How do we understand the concept of home? And I believe this is not answering my own question. I will have a substantive time, hopefully. But then the concept of home is very key. When you say people should come and study and go back home, the question you should be asking yourself is, what is the agency of the individual involved? So, for example, when I hear that there are Commonwealth scholars coming here to study and they are mandated to go back home, I ask myself, is Commonwealth now setting an agenda for students who are supposed to come and study here? do those students have any sort of agency? And it seems to me that the former is the case, where the students do not have any agency, rather, Commonwealth has an agenda for them. And that, for me, is equal to academic colonization. Really, you are basically telling me what to do. You are telling me that because I do not have the means to support myself at Oxford, you have given me money. I have to obey your orders and go back home. Even if going back home means that I should go back and be a product of unemployment statistical data. Basically, that's what you're telling me. Most importantly, what we do not remember is that when a student comes to Oxford or Cambridge or whichever university, that student applied to Oxford for a number of reasons, not just to come and study. Of course, study is the primary thing. That student applied to Cambridge to come and study, but there are other factors. There's the possibility of running away from danger. It's true. If you were a Somalian in the 80s, 90s, if you were South Sudanese, 2012, 2013, 14, think about what happens if you were away. I would end here for now. Hopefully I can continue later.
I think you've hinted on a few of the factors that lead people to make that decision. And I'll go over to Epifania. I think Epifania is from one of those regions in Africa that is often forgotten. It's a Portuguese-speaking Africa. She's in Mozambique right now, joining us from Mozambique. So Epifania, what would be the factors that decide for you, do I stay or do I go? What would be those factors that help you make that decision?
Yeah, thank you. I think my colleagues have alluded to some of them, but I think generally I put them in two kind of levels. One of them I think we're already discussing is whether your country is able to reintegrate you. And this means that you're able to be able to be reintegrated, the skills you've gained, the training, the experience you've gained abroad is compensated in a way that you feel that you're being engaged professionally, that you feel that your ambitions are being met. And this for me Mozambique means that I find that here I have similar opportunities and sometimes even better, more interesting career pathways that you don't find them in the UK or in Europe. And that offer that opportunity for me to be able to feel that I'm really being engaged intellectually, professionally, and having so many choices to look for. But also there's the social level side as well, which is that we're young people, we are recently trained, though we're still in training, but we're young, we want to build the life, start the life. And here, Mozambique for me is a country that is offer really cheap and easy ways to start a life. And you're doing this in your community with your own support system, and you're feeling relevant for your own country. So I think these are the considerations that I made for myself, and I find that my countries offer me quite better opportunities to explore career and personally. It's better to be here.
Is that a government thing? Is it something in Mozambique where you're going abroad, but you have a place to go back to? Because a lot of people finish their courses and they start job hunting. Is that a policy in Mozambique?
I think for me, important factor is that I studied here, I've been trained here, my first degree, and I've worked here before doing my master's degree, before doing my PhD. So I went to do my PhD while I already had work experience and I knew my labor market. So, for example, I think previous speaker was asking whether I will be treated as an immigrant. I don't feel like that because I've been here. I studied here, I worked here. So when I go back to, when I go to Cambridge to study, I'm just going to acquire new skills, but I'm already in the marketplace. So it's not a government field, but it's this the fact that your country demands the skills and the training that you have, and and you see different careers and sectors where your skills are being demanded and they are compensated in a way that is very competitive, even compared to Europe or to the UK. And in my case, definitely having experience in being already trained in the country makes a lot of difference. And I think this is also a requirement in some of the scholarships. I have a Commonwealth scholarship, and I think this is a great factor an important factor that people have experience, because then having a parallel, not knowing where are you going back to, you don't have that question anymore.
Great, I'm very delighted to pick up on that, at least positive note. We decided to leave this panel to last so we can jog you all up and cause some trouble, some good trouble. I want to bring Azamati back into the conversation because I like good trouble. And just to think about your work spans Russia, China, and so forth, which makes your research really interesting. But to think about this from an African perspective. So for me, coming to Cambridge is almost coming back home, because we had initial discussions about Africa Oxford here with Professor David Dunn and others. But when we talk about these things, we're focused on Africa because we have particular interest there. Is this a peculiarly African issue, and why should other parts of the world think about it? I mean, everyone is in a global crisis right now.
Oh, good. Thank you. The question we should be asking ourselves is it only Africans who study in Oxford and Cambridge and other universities around the world? Of course not. Now, is the issue of going home only peculiar to Africa? Of course not. There is, however, a difference. The difference is that the others do not feel obliged. The others are not emotionally blackmailed and morally compelled to go back home. I've met Indians who have decided to go back home on their own accord. In fact, last year, there was a statistics out there. Koreans who study outside South Korea, almost 88% of them go back home on their own accord. Let's ask why they go back home. Because there is the enabling environment for them. Now, when we say, and I hate this whole idea, we always criticize other people when they say Africa is a country, but we like to do it ourselves. We say, oh, you come from Africa, so go back to Africa. We forget that Africa has 54 countries. What happens in Mozambique is not the same as what happens in Ghana. And in fact, even in Ghana, what happens is in East Legon is not what happens in my little village back home. Just as we have children of Dangote and the other billionaires from Africa coming to Oxford and Cambridge, you also have the children of very poor people coming from Africa. Now, the question we should be asking is, Dangote's son or daughter can say with pride that when I finish Cambridge, I'm going back home. Because, of course, his father sits on billions of dollars. What does my grandmother sit on? A half-acre patch of land that was even rented to her to do her cassava farm. When I go back, am I going to use my DPhil in international relations to farm with her? Of course not. Now, if I could finish in the next 2 minutes. I've 4 main points I want to make here. When we say Africans should go back home, we should not forget that we are depriving ourselves of a lot of things. The first one is that, as we sit here, look, 90% of us, we send money back home, don't we? Now, if you were doing your PhD back in Ghana or your country back in Africa, how much are you paid as stipends? In fact, some people have to even go and borrow. In fact, some people would even like to sell their whole families to do a PhD because they don't have the means to. Now, I'm here, I'm earning £15,609 from the UK from my scholarship, right? Out of that, I end up sending almost £6,000 back home. How much is left? Something around 9,000. Now I have to take care of accommodation and food and everything. By the time I finish, sometimes I'm even in debt crisis. Now, I finish my PhD, you tell me that I should go back home. When I go back home, how much am I giving to my siblings who are going to school, somebody needs to take care of their school fees. Now, if you go back and you happen to even be employed, you are paid how much? Peanuts. How much are you able to use to take care of the rest of the family and yourself? Now, to your mother, your grandmother, your great auntie, your great uncle, etc., etc. But if you were here and you were working and you were earning at least £28,000 a year, you are able to send home some money. And in fact, that even helps the government because the government taxes remittances. That is one. Two, the other thing we need to bear in mind is that if you tell Africans to go back home, what you're doing is that you are killing talent. In today's world, it is a globalized world. We are learning from everywhere. And we need to always remember that some part of the world is more developed than others. So if I am here and I'm studying a course in, say, biological sciences, the resources I would have access to here in the UK are not the same as I would have access to in Rwanda, assuming I come from Rwanda. The other thing we need to also bear in mind in relation to this point is the fact that if you tell people to go back home, you are displacing other people. Because, look, some of you would bear me witness. When you go back home, sometimes your old professors feel that you are a threat to them because you're coming from Oxford and Cambridge, right? You're coming to take their job from them. And it does happen. A lot of companies back home are looking for people who went to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, blah, blah, blah. But remember, if you go back home and you take those people's jobs, they are displaced, they are unemployed. What happens? Are you telling me that it is the whole of Africa that can come to Oxford and Cambridge? Of course not. So what should those people do? Now, the last point I want to make in relation to this. Look, there is an honest conversation we need to have. Some time ago, Donald Trump said, people who don't like America should go back to their countries. Everybody jumped at him. But look, within ourselves, we do it. We say, oh, when you finish, go back home because you've got a lot to give back to your country, blah, blah, blah. We are playing to the old narrative of Africans don't belong here. When they finish, they have to go back home. No, it is a global world. When a British person goes to Kenya or goes and lives in Rwanda, he does not say that I need to go back home or whatever. He decides on his own accord to say, I want to go back home. If an African can stay in the UK and give back to his country, what is wrong with that? Mm-hmm. Why must it always be that morally we are always compelled to make it seem like, we don't have a place in the rest of the world? It is a global world. Let us take advantage of the global aspect of things. Let us take advantage of globalization and help our continent, for me.
Wonderful. So thank you. Questions of agency, identity, questions of responsibility, obligation, questions around what resources are available, lots to think about. I want to bring in an expert who's thought about this in all possible directions, both as a researcher but also as one of the supporters for African scholars in Oxford. So Maura, what new ways can we think about this question? The dichotomy of home versus not home doesn't seem to be taking us too far.
Yeah, thanks. And I think a lot of what I wanted to say has been alluded to or spoken about already, so I'll try not to repeat too much. But where I wanted to start is kind of when we come to institutions like Oxford and Cambridge, we fill out these applications, we do these interviews, and we all talk about how we're going to change the countries that we come from. And I think that for the biggest part, I think it is sincere. And that people want to do that. But I think it's also the case that people have, as Martin said, personal ambitions and responsibilities to family as well that they have to think about. And so I think that if we think about it in this dichotomy, should I go home, should I not go home, maybe it's not a very helpful conversation. I think it can be antagonizing. It could bring about very negative emotions. And I think it brushes over quite a lot of issues that are involved in thinking through things like this. So I've just kind of written down some questions that I think may be helpful for a person in this position to think about. So I'm nearing the end of my PhD, and so I've been thinking about this a lot, and this is also based on conversations with friends. But I think that the foundation of this is essentially having a very honest, inward-looking conversation with the self, but one that doesn't ignore kind of the world and the structural issues that we exist in. And so first question for me is, how can I contribute to finding solutions to this particular problem that I'm interested in? Where might I be most successful? And I don't think it's asking whether I'd be most successful in a Western university or in an African context, but it could be kind of not going back to South Africa, which is where I'm from, and perhaps going to work in Nairobi, for example. And so the issue of South-South collaborations came up earlier, and I think this is an example where kind of the dichotomy of here and there may not be helpful. And coming to this institution is also a very transformative experience. And so what you might have said in your interview can change. And I think people are allowed to have that. You've had new experiences, you've learned new skills. And so then I think the question can be, what has your new experiences, what have your new skills taught you? And how can you use these to advance the solutions to the issues that you're interested in? And I think to this is kind of related to the issue of collaboration that's come up again. You've met so many new people. How can you work with them to advance these issues that you are interested in? And then I thought about kind of 3 different ways to think about them in 3 categories. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I think they interconnect in many different ways. But the personal, the structural, and the global. So in the personal, I mean, I think it's really important to take into account kind of, as a human, we're all humans, what we need. And I think especially now, it's so difficult to be a young person. I don't think I can think of one place where it's easy to be a young person today. And so for me, I think it's important to ask, where do I feel happy? Where do I feel safe? What are my needs and wants, and where are they most predominantly met? Where are my friends? Where's my family? And what do I need to, quote unquote, fight the world's fight, which is what my scholarship encourages me to do. But I also think that despite the this neoliberal push towards individualism, we don't exist in silos, we don't exist as individuals. And I wanted to highlight this because we have, as I said, obligations towards other people, like friends and family, but there's also these structural issues as well. So the issue came up about unemployment. I mean, that's what my research is about graduate youth unemployment. And the numbers are really scary in places, especially like Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, where people go to school, university, and still are unable to find work. And then you've got issues around racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, classism, visa regimes that are oppressive. And these occur in different places, but in different ways. So I'm not saying that one context is better at some of these issues as well. And I think what's also important is that we inhabit these different places in different ways as well. And so I think in places like Oxford, we find ourselves in elite spaces, and how we get treated in those spaces differs, like, as Matthias mentioned, according to whether you're from a rich family or a poor family, just for an example. But I think if we're thinking in about going back home as well, is that we also have to be careful not to kind of perpetrate the same violence that we speak out against when we're in these institutions, because we are kind of being trained at the heart of empire, and we're the creation of colonial kind of violence and persisting colonialism in the world. And so I think that reflection is quite important, that we don't go back and do the same things that we were trying to fight against here. And then, of course, there's just the global, colonial histories that we all know about, persistent colonial issues, and then what some might kind of think about as globalization in a world that's becoming more interconnected. And so then you might think about where you're best placed to do the work that you're interested in, and that could be anywhere in the world.
So the personal, the structural, the global. I think this is a good place to get a few reflections from the audience, if you allow us, because I think this we could talk about. We had a 3-hour journey from Oxford, and I'm telling you, we thrashed this in 3 different ways and didn't even realize when we got to Cambridge. So could we maybe invite a couple of questions, comments?
But could we also ask Nelson to comment
Yes.
as well, because there were no questions for Nelson as well. So Nelson would like to.
He can also tell us how he made that decision when time came for him.
We do.
So do we have any questions or reflections or thoughts from the audience? Oh, I can see some hands. Oh, wow.
This is the trouble.
And then there was a hand over there next, and then Professor.
Thank you very much, and it's really interesting getting to hear from Lillian, PhD student, second year, going to third year soon. So I think I also do relate to some of the conversations or discussions which my peers have spoken to. However, I feel as the University of Cambridge, the university could do better to prepare students, international students who come from resource-limited setting, in preparing them for the job market. Why do I say so? Because we've had this conversation, we usually have these conversations with our peers from Africa about what's going to happen after our study. And I've come to realize that a lot of students who school in Cambridge actually do not actually know exactly what they might be facing post their studies. A lot of my peers in PhDs left from undergrads, masters, and straight into PhD. Very few students actually had that prior work experience like the virtual speaker had, which actually did prepare her to know the job market from where she's coming from her own country. So I think the university could possibly run schemes that could help students understand the job market, prepare themselves for the job market, not just in the UK, but more precisely within the African context. A lot of experienced researchers, a lot of experienced professionals who've studied before abroad and who are succeeding in their careers within the African continent and who have stories to tell, and from their experience could possibly share one or two insights which could take away the fright which most students have regarding what they may possibly face when going back to the African country. We understand that there are quite a lot of challenges within which are not just specific just for the African continent. It might also be applicable to other countries, but then if there are mentorship opportunities that the university can create for African scholars, linking them with mentors who've studied also abroad and who are actually leading in their different spaces within the continent, is going to go a long way to help.
Okay, thank you. I mean, is that something that Oxford Africa program or Cambridge Africa is that something that would be considered as something that we might be able to provide?
Yeah, I might just maybe I'm answered a little bit. For our Cambridge Africa PhD scholars, I mean, it's small, but it's in the they do apply for mobility grants, so they get some money when they finish their PhD, and they can go back and it doesn't necessarily mean that they go back, but they'll form links back at home, back in whichever university they choose to work with. So they'll start some research work, they'll buy equipment for a lab, they'll do run workshops. So there's a bit of money for them to start forming that link. So whether they go and work there or not, I'm sure there's one, Chioma, I don't know that she's around, but she got some of that money and went back to her university and brought put a lot of equipment back in Nigeria. So there are many small ways in which you can encourage that. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go back home, but you're making links and making connections, and therefore you're able to do things even if you're not there in person.
I think for AfOx, so one advantage we have is that we have research fellowship awards and studentships as well, so graduate scholarships and research fellowships, and often they're in the same spaces. So we have opportunities for scholars to interact with fellows and see people who are doing this in their day job, as it were. This is how your life is. I think you've raised something really important, Lillian, and one very recent study actually showed that universities spent 9 times more on student recruitment than they do on career transitions for scholars, and it's even worse for international students. This is just data from local students. So there's definitely something more that can be done. And for us, the program is to create those links, create opportunities for scholars throughout their PhD and throughout their studies to keep being linked. And I think one creative thing that we are developing at the moment is something we're calling the Ubuntu transitions, which we're hoping will give opportunities for students to spend some time in an institution in the continent after their studies in Oxford, to start developing those links and hopefully see that there's possibilities of building meaningful careers, not to coerce, but to encourage.
Thank you. I think there was a question this side of the room, but I'm not sure if you have the mic. Was there
So I have a mic here. I don't particularly have a question, just really a point for my friend on the left-hand side who made the point about obviously, I suppose having to make a choice between having to leave and having to stay. And I'd like to start off with a question for him really about whether he really feels that one person can make a difference. And that's pretty much what it is, I suppose. I'm not on a PhD program, but I was part of the sort of Alvarado program. And as far as I could see from my experience really is the opportunity to sort of leave your environment and go somewhere else. What it gives you really is perspective that you may not necessarily get from a local setting. And what that means is that when you have international perspective, when you sort of go back home, you can certainly incorporate what you've learned in that sort of setting. And I suppose my second point is what really happens if 90% of scholars who are leaving Africa for Cambridge or Oxford really stay there, then you have a mass exodus of those people who've really been trained, but they're not going back home to incorporate. So I think the ideology, may be borderline afflictive, so to speak, and I hope that, we can hopefully have some further chat on that.
Thank you. I think Professor Sawa had a...
Yes. This is just a comment and a congratulation to the whole panel, starting from the man who is very well dressed, nice and clean, so different from me. Congratulations, good point. And ending to my teacher, Professor Nelson. Prof, you still have a lot to do. I hope yourself and Kevin and Brian and all of you, Caroline and yourself, Madam Chair, I don't think we have a solution of this problem in this room. We can keep talking till tomorrow. Nothing will happen because it's all linked. One university can decide and say, okay, we're not going to send in bracket home. Where is home? I agree with you, but it's not home. Because who is deciding that a country is your first home? At some point, everybody is migrating from some place to some place, even internally. So at the end of the day, there is no home. Today, pathogens and viruses are smarter than us because they don't do things like this. COVID virus will not say to Ebola virus, go back home.
Good point.
US immigration cannot say Ebola, no, you can't come here. We have to fingerprint you, we have to stop you. No. This is global. This is a serious problem. We're just not realizing this. We got to get together. I think now universities should wake up. Caroline, this is a wake-up call you're giving to all of us. We should take it seriously. We got to develop global health. We got to fix public health back to normal. We cannot do public health or global health or life-saving activities if you have to wait for 6 months to get a visa. Or after training such a great, bright people, you send them back home, even if it's a good job, if you go help grandma, but maybe you shouldn't be doing only that. What we should do is to really work with universities and have political will. Government should join. We need all together with all of you, universities, senior higher leaders and funders, to make sure that programs like Thrive, you just presented a very nice training program. When people are trained, you share some great ones. Again, I said this morning, we are only living on external funding. If it's not NIH, it's Wellcome Trust. If not Gates, it's World Bank, etc. So we have to come up with some type of global health, global collaboration, sustainable system. You don't prevent emergency health during emergency. You don't prepare the war during the war. You prepare the war in peacetime. Bill Gates wrote a few books. The last one is really great. You should read it. We need to build these firefighters now. before 5. So I really recommend that. Your project, Professor Nelson and Kevin, the best way for you to sustain this is to review with the universities, Oxford, Cambridge, how we can reconsider, how we can build global health based on what we learned from this COVID, this pandemic. If you send us back home, make sure we don't just spend our time in the cassava field. By doing that, you can have another, like the plan C you recommended this afternoon. You have to have your plan C yourself. I saw your project 1, 2, you should have 3, which is how to make sure when people are very well trained, they can keep one leg here, the other leg there. You should accompany, encourage them instead of sending them back like a package. Sometimes if they stay here, my friend, I have to tell you, if they stay, they are not doing a good job either. They stay, sometimes they will be doing really, really the wrong things. That's why sometimes it's also not good. Even if they stay here, we still need to monitor. We have to set up an evaluation system and monitor and make this is being sustained. So, Prof, look for funding. Global health preparedness and emergency response will never work. We have to fix primary health care. We have to fix public health system, primary public health system. Both kids. Once you do that, then you can link everything else. Then you can attract politicians. But you cannot attract politicians and government leaders and congressmen if you don't take it from the start. Sorry for being long.
Thank you so much. So I think with that, I think what we are hearing is that, you know, the training and the capacity building and the collaborations are a long-term project. This is not a matter of somebody coming for a few years and that's it. We need to make sure, and we've had many discussions about this in Cambridge, Africa, that the university and hopefully the you know wider government invests in a longer term scheme which supports equitable partnerships and equitable collaborations in the long term, because it's only by long-term strategies that we're going to solve some of these massive problems. I think you want the last word.
We want to give everyone to give a minute, sort of one sentence, last word, so that we hear from sort of what are you taking away from the conversation and what are you leaving us with? Wow. One sentence.
I won't be able to do a one sentence thing, but I would like to disagree with a lot that I've heard today. So the question about going back home is one that I believe, this is where we might agree, that is answered personally. But it is not an empty question. So when I was being attracted to scientific research, one of the facts that was given was Africa as a continent requires at least 1 million PhDs to reach the global average. So whose problem is that? Yeah, as a citizen of Kenya, that is my problem. And so when I sit in Cambridge in an air-conditioned office saying that, you know, I'm running away from the problems of my country, I have to consider whether the ethical argument surrounding my need to go back home is weaker than the arguments that I'm using to justify, such as my personal ambitions and problems. And just to wrap this up, I believe that context matters. Of course, when the phrase "go back home" comes from Donald Trump saying the S countries, well, that I don't agree with. But when it comes from the society, which has to progress regardless of our personal ambitions, then I believe the ethical argument is far much stronger than our personal needs may be. Thank you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Epiphania, do you have final words?
I think what I'm taking here with the way is diversity and being creative in finding solutions to our problems. We were discussing here South-South cooperation, and we were discussing discussing that, you can, I can even be in Cambridge and working in research projects in Mozambique today, or I can be in the US working in research projects, or anywhere in the world really. So I think there are different, diverse and different ways we can contribute to our countries, but we also have to recognize even being in our country can contribute greatly. But it doesn't mean being isolated from the world. I still work every day with colleagues in Cambridge, and we have research programs combining different research institutions from everywhere in the world, still being here. So we can be global, still be local, but we can still work globally and impact in our country. So there are diverse and very creative ways of doing this. This is what I'm taking.
Beautiful, big local. Maura?
I think, it's such a complex conversation, I think. So I think I'll close by responding to Martin's last point, and I think it's something that came up in a question about whether one person can make a difference, and why I think I wouldn't give as much weight to kind of personal moral obligation is that I think it's an issue to burden individuals with things that are systemic and structural problems. So I think that we can have as many PhDs as we want on the African continent, but unless the power balance changes, unless we really deal with these historical injustices, then nothing's going to come from that. So I think there's a limit to how much you can make a person individually responsible for what are massive issues.
Okay. The Excellency, please. Give us a parting shot.
There is a real world, but if as Africans we want to stay with dreams, we can afford and keep dreaming forever. And those who want the real world will continue to live in the real world. The real world is that today, a home is where you make it. So, if I can stay here and be able to pay my siblings' fees back at home so that one day they will not all be dependent on me, I'd prefer that than going back to go and be a productive unemployment statistical data. It is equally important to understand. Today, someone has been used to make an example since morning. Professor Kevin Marsh. We're having a conversation in the afternoon. He said he moved to Kenya in 1982. Now, assume that Professor Kevin Marsh said, Britain is my home, I want to stay here. Kenya would have gotten nothing out of him. But he didn't. He went. How about him? Is he not a human being? So the question we should be asking is that, where can we help from? Nobody is saying that we shouldn't help. But can I be somewhere and still help? If I can, why must I necessarily go back? In fact, even though it's not my intention to stay anywhere, but for me, I should not impose my will on other people. People have rights, just as they have responsibilities. If you want them to take up their responsibilities, allow them to exercise their rights as well. Dare to dream wherever you find yourself, and dare to live in the real world wherever you find yourself. That's my word.
Perfect.
I wonder whether we can hear one last, we won't finish. Let's finish with Prof. He has many, many years of experience. What will you have to say about this discussion? What is your
challenge our youthful enthusiasm?
Yeah, my main lesson from this discussion is that there's a lot that needs to be done, and discussions like this to continue. As was said by Professor Samba, this cannot be solved in one day or in 1 hour. This is a discussion that needs to happen over a long period of time. If I use another 1 minute, there are many people in Uganda who used to argue, like my good colleague down the bench. And I would tell them, you think out there it's a much better world for you, I would advise otherwise. Because in Uganda, despite the problems it has, there's a lot of opportunities, and moreover, you can see your tangible results. You can see the impact you are making on other people. And if you leave your connections with the West and collaborate with them, and every year you go someplace to Cambridge and discuss with your colleagues there, you go to Oxford, you go to wherever, you'll find the work extremely exciting. And there's several examples I can give. And people come back and say, Prof, you are right. It makes a difference. So this is a long discussion that needs to happen.
So, I mean, I think we really need to thank all of the panelists for all of their fantastic thought-provoking contributions, and I do hope that we table more time for discussion on this topic, both in this kind of setting, but also in, you know, smaller group settings where we can really talk about these issues at length and hear a lot more voices from, you know, everybody in the room as well. But just to thank all of our speakers this afternoon, especially this group here. One last round of applause, and then I'll hand over to Carol.